and also the challenge of hybrids, where the organization still has a lot of waterfall mentality and a lot of waterfall planning processes, but they want agile delivery.
So not a specific brand, but bringing together and still expecting agile results at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Another group want to share what you talked about? Someone else? Can I see a hand over here? And the jacket, there you go. Thank you. Go ahead.
The group is experience from my team.
Okay.
I'm a software developer working on the Agoda software, agoda.com, and we scaling on every feature that we implement. We try experiment A/B test, and we when we add a new feature, we experiment every time. It's start from 50-50. If it win, it will scale. If it's not win or bug, we can reduce.
Mm-hmm. So kind of either more or less of it in each case.
Everything is run with real time, no rollback.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, is there a particular method? Is there a particular method you're subscribing to that you're using, or is it kind of a combination of methods? Safe? Okay, thank you. Is there one more before we go on into looking at some of the methods? Yep.
We've also used SAFE, sort of a modified SAFE, and we're applying it now on business elements you mentioned earlier, like that sort of middle management. So we're using the SAFE idea. We haven't necessarily always done 3 levels, but at least 2 now, always pushing our clients to the why. But even if they give me a feature, I always ask them to step back into a why discussion instead of the specifics too early.
Good. Thank you. So we'll have another opportunity to talk a little bit more. Let's get into some of the methods here. So the Scaled Agile framework, certainly the one that I'm most familiar with, many of you are most familiar with, potentially, because it's very spelled out and it's very well marketed, honestly. So there's program execution, right, which is that it runs these programs, this whole area here, which they call the release train. It's basically a lot of Agile teams together being coordinated. You have code quality aspects, which are basically XP or Agile engineering practices. In fact, DevOps has some of those practices now as well. There's another blog post I did about Agile and DevOps that kind of talks about that. We'll see it in a minute, at least part of that. And then transparency, which is the idea that there's a demo of everything. We're not getting a demo of just one team's work, but that's actually everybody's. Now, this cuts both ways, because a lot of times one team will say, well, we should have the freedom to do what we want to do. But they actually have to look at the fact they're a team of teams, so they have to be basically in alignment with all the other teams. And that actually causes friction. And then we have the idea, of course, of alignment, what we talked about, which is that all these teams need to work together, which is not easy, which is why we heard several comments, including this morning, about not scaling unless you have to, because it's not easy to get all these teams to work together in this way. So there's a SAFE case study. You can find it on the Scaled Agile Framework website on Telstra. I was fortunate enough when I was speaking in Shanghai to have some people who knew the team who were in my session. So they kind of gave me some additional input on this. But this is kind of the top point: 6x increase, 50% cost to deliver reduction. But I'll give you some of the actual points that we got from the people who were in the session. One, this was actually done with no PI planning. So PI planning is where in SAFE we have the big room planning we talked about this morning. So everybody comes and does big room planning, which I think is a very useful alignment component. But in some cases, I think, and maybe this organization as well, it may not necessarily be absolutely necessary, especially depending on the number of teams that you're having scale. In this case, they didn't use it. Another thing that happened here is that they actually started that they said SAFE was a starting point, but it was not an end goal. So you did not want to actually use SAFE as, okay, we want to end up, this is kind of our shoe, as we talked about. This is our starting point. It will give us a good idea. It's a gauge, but it's not where we want to end up necessarily. It's done in the enterprise data warehousing team, and so this group actually wasn't very successful initially. So people said, you know what, do whatever you want, because you're not succeeding now, so you might as well try something. So actually there was a lot of leeway to try something, which was very successful in the end. Look to leadership buy-in as critical. And you will see this whether you look at some of the State of Agile surveys or whatever it is, leadership buy-in is almost always critical. I think it may be even more so in Asia, but certainly in the U.S. and elsewhere it still is. You have to have some idea of leadership agreeing and supporting and sponsoring rather than having friction with leadership, because that doesn't usually go well. So they wanted to have leadership buy into this. They actually started based on Dean's book because the SAFe framework was not out and published when they did this. So this was actually prior to the big picture, which we all know and love. And this was actually quite successful. The people in the room told me this, each person, yeah, this is really good. It actually worked well. So these are people from Australia who knew the team and knew, I think her name is M. Pretty? Yep, Campbell Pretty. And they felt that this was a really successful implementation of SAFe. So this actually went well. I'm going to look at another case study shortly, which may not be quite the same. Move on for us. This is disciplined Agile delivery. Now, disciplined Agile delivery is by Scott Ember. I've used some of his work earlier when he used to do what's called the Agile Unified Process. It's truly a hybrid. This is not by any means a pure Agile approach. I think many people have a violent reaction when they see this approach because it's not pure Agile by any means. He doesn't say it is, actually. Disciplined Agile delivery, DAD, process, decision framework, is a people-first, learning-oriented hybrid Agile approach and solution delivery that whose value delivery lifecycle is goal-driven, is enterprise-aware, and it's scalable. Now, there's a lot of components to this. I'm going to say this. Is there anything you notice about that description? It's long and complicated. And this framework is not for a beginner. If you want to do what we call shoe, right, you want to start out, I don't know this is the place for you. Because this assumes that you have a certain level of knowledge of how you scale things, of how things work, of what you want to use and what you don't want to use. And if you don't have that baseline, this is going to be kind of like getting lost in the woods because there's just so much in it. We'll see more of that as we look at the next. There's 4 potential life cycles. I'm sure you can recognize integration, construction, and the transition, which looks probably very familiar if you've done traditional projects, right? So 4 life cycles: Agile basic life cycle, extending Scrum, continuous delivery, disciplined DAD life cycle. There's the advanced lean DAD life cycle, which gives you some additional components. And then there's one that's based on lean startup, exploratory life cycle. The entire idea behind this is to give you choices. They call it starting in the middle, right? So it doesn't start big. It's safe. Kind of starts with everything in it. And it doesn't start small, like less, which we'll see in a minute, which says, you know what, we're just going to start very minimalist, and then we're going to let you, if there's something else you need, but we start minimalist. But here he says, I'm kind of starting in the middle, and I'm assuming that you will take what you need, and you will craft the solution that you need. But now, remember, if you are the person who is in shoe, your team is in shoe, you're just beginning to learn, how's this going to go for you? It's probably not going to go well, because there's a lot of background that's assumed in being able to use this approach. Now, ability to have agility at scale, this is the diagram. It talks about individuals, teams, IT departments, and organizations, and how they cross-cut through scale, the DAD framework, and then the basic Agile and Lean fundamentals. There's a book that's pretty good. It's a short read. If you're interested in disciplined Agile delivery, I think you can get this on Amazon. And it gives you just a quick idea of how DAD and disciplined Agile delivery actually work. But the key here is that the complexity is very significant. It's not a simple approach, and it's very much a hybrid approach. It is not a pure Scrum approach. Now we have large-scale Scrum, LESS, by Larman and Vode. These are the 2 first videos that I did on the Auspicious Agile Scaling series that you'll see if you're on the blog. And I actually had conversations with Bas Vode back and forth about that series because he made some corrections as to the analysis that AgileScaling.org had on this. So large-scale Scrum, scale Scrum by trying to stay true to Scrum and Agile without adding too much. The idea with less is that less is more. That's basically the moniker. You just get Scrum, and you don't add a lot to it. You don't put a lot of stuff into it. You don't, we need this, we need that, give us architecture, give us this. We just, Scrum Master, product owner, we add one thing here, we kind of have an overall retrospective. That's the core of less. So it's quite elegant in that respect. This is what we call less huge, This is the one that's going to be used in the case study coming up here, the JP Morgan case study, which is also on the LESS website, unless it's changed. It was there last I checked. The only difference in LESS Huge is that you add, instead of just having one product owner, you have these area product owners. You have a product owner for each one of your areas. Now, having a product owner for each area, the idea is it lessens the load so that each product owner can focus. I actually did use these concepts when I was doing some big work. We did these concepts when I was doing some work at Disney and elsewhere, where we have multiple product owners. So I've seen this in effect, but this is basically all that changes in LESS Huge. So it's elegant, but it does not give a tremendous amount of additional on top of just the base of Scrum. So you can look at LESS Huge structure, which is for 8+ teams, right? If you don't have 8 teams, you're going to just use regular LESS, 2 brands of it. Each requirement area has between 4 to 8 teams, avoiding violating this range. So each area product owner should not be overloaded. They should only get 4 to 8 teams, although we'll see that product owners may still be a little overloaded. LESS Huge, the product, one overall product owner is responsible for the product-wide proposition and deciding which teams work in which area. He works closely with the area product owner. So you have people call it the Uber product owner, I think we've heard of that. There's somebody who's basically bringing together all those voices and making sure they're in alignment. And then over here, there is one product level sprint and different sprint for each requirement area, and it ends one integrated whole product. So everybody's sprinting together is the idea. You don't have everybody off doing their own thing. I remember working with a director at an entertainment company, and he said, oh, well, we're going to have one team with a 3-week sprint, one team with a 1-week sprint, one team with a 4-week sprint, and I'll tell you, this probably is not a great idea. So the idea that you keep these, it's the same alignment we saw in SAFe, right? You need to keep that component in place. These are LESS principles. Queuing theory, large-scale Scrum is Scrum. Like we said, it's just Scrum. Systems thinking and lean thinking, continuous improvement towards perfection, customer-centric, whole product focus, and more with less transparency. Now, is there anything you notice about this slide? You could probably say the same thing of most of the other methods I'm going to talk about, or have talked about. This is not unique. Maybe large-scale Scrum is unique to it. Besides that, it's basically, could be said of any of them. Here's a case study. So this is what's posted on the website, as is. You can see we had this identification of real product owners, quote, real product owners. The creation of feature teams, add rather than component teams, eliminating the level of manager role. This was replaced by team members. Remaining line management became coaches, so they're changing the coaches. They used to be managers, now they're coaches. We'll see how effective that was. Teams make important decisions, including hiring and firing team members and Scrum Masters. The outcomes, I've changed this for this talk actually, because there was a gentleman who I will not name, who was at my previous conference who was on this project. And he explained what happened during the implementation. So he said the outcomes were shared unofficially by one of the practitioners here, and basically here are the comments that he had. 3,000 plus people were on it, with 5-time basically zones, worked with Craig Marmon, so he came in periodically to guide the process, and they used LESS Huge. So they did not use LESS, the smaller version. Obviously they had much more than 8 teams. Oops. Yep. So more recently, there was a crackdown, and so it's no longer Scrum, but now they call it Scrum But. So it wasn't basically pure Scrum anymore, and now the LESS kind of enthusiasts were not really getting the focus they had initially, because they started saying we're going to transition this a little bit more to a different model. They also, basically the self-organizing teams did not have guidance. The practitioner basically said that it was Kyaku, and someone could forgive me for my Japanese not being very good, but the idea was a revolutionary change. They changed everything in their model, and this did not necessarily go well. It was so much change so quickly that basically it's like pulling a rubber band, it just snapped back the other way. And people said, whoa, that was just too much. Changing everything, every team. So they're still using Agile, they're still using Scrum, but they've really backed off on this revolutionary change. And that's really what differed here in the outcome. So the outcome from a LESS perspective, I leave it to LESS to speak to what, where that was. The outcome from an Agile perspective, it sounds like some of the initial adoption, they're starting to make adjustments. They're not sticking with the way that they kind of rolled this out very aggressively. So the case study, obviously you can look at it there. I'm sure you can look at the Scrum Gathering, Global Scrum Gathering to find more about this as well. So what I like in each one, all right, the sheer ability of SAFe, you lay it out, you've got everything you need pretty much. I mean, in practice, in the years that I've spent both doing traditional and Agile Met projects and work, pretty much everything that I've seen is really talked about and captured in SAFe. They do a good job of really capturing, whether it's architecture, whether it's the need for the ability to deploy with the DevOps, they capture those things. I think they've actually done a very good job of that. So it's very chewable. Aligned hierarchy of work, 6 levels of planning, stable teams, you fund your release train, you don't just fund the project. There's a program level focus, right? So it's really very good at running programs. You hear the big planning term, it's excellent for that. Now, the weakness is, comes overly prescriptive. A lot of people say, man, you're boxing me in. You're making me do SAFe. I don't want to be this boxed in with SAFe. Steady state process, light treatment of product ownership, not really focused on. One of the others that I would say also is the portfolio level. It's getting stronger, but it's not necessarily as strong as this program. So the program level, how do you execute a program is really good. But then when you get to the portfolio, which is budgets and funding and how do you do those sorts of things, I think it's still evolving. It's not really the point where I think you could just do this and that would do the job for you. We look at DAD as a hybrid framework, so let's just know that off the bat. Some people may like that, some people may not. If you want to say, look, it's pure Scrum, please don't use DAD, you won't be happy. But if you feel that you can adapt some other methods, it may be okay for you. Risk value approach, team level discipline, scaling factors or account, it's great for hot and re. So once you've got some fundamentals, you might be able to use a lot of the components in here to really expand your practice. And I think that's really beneficial. Offers 4 different life cycles: Agile Basic, Advanced Lean, Continuous Delivery, Exploratory. Again, if you understand those fundamentals, this can be pretty beneficial for you to be able to make some choices. If you don't understand the fundamentals, it's just too much information. It's a lot of noise. Low chewability, which is you can't just come in and say, take this and use it. The project orientation or up phases, unified process. So unified process, some of you, I'm curious, a show of hands, how many of you have used the unified process before? 2, 3, 4, okay, I'll explain what I mean here. The unified process is kind of like a transitional between traditional projects and waterfall and iterative and agile methods. It's kind of like the in-between. And that's really where a lot of this was birthed, was from that in-between that we have in the unified process. So that's actually where a lot of the orientation in this method comes. There's a lack of alignment and hierarchy, work in multiple levels and aligned agile planning, and non-agile portfolio management, because he really sticks with what the organization does. He doesn't say, go like SAFe does, and here's your Kanban. He doesn't do that. And little product design. And then less. Product owner focus. So product owner, team, chief product owner, this is good, but you'll also notice that it's a weakness because it can be overly ambitious for one product owner to manage so much. There's a lot of complexity. That's why SAFe has a product management team. That's why SAFe has a shared services team. That's why SAFe has a release train engineer and all these other things. And this product owner could get really overwhelmed, potentially. Teams align. Yeah. Teams align with requirement areas. Start where you are, right? So it stays consistent with the foundations of Scrum. I think it's very elegant in that way. It's a very elegant approach to just taking Scrum and scaling it up. Lean thinking and systems thinking. Lack of aligned hierarchy of work and multiple levels of agile planning. So this is the feedback that Bas Foad gave, was that it's not really focused on a program and a portfolio level. He said, look, it's focused on a product. So you're not going to see those concepts here. It's focused on a product. So don't look for them. So the agilescaling.org, I think you've had feedback to them as well, that don't just analyze us like on the SAFe scale of portfolio and program, analyze it based on a product view. So I want to give that note of fair treatment here as we look at the program and the portfolio level of less. What others think? So as we said, agilescaling.org, a lot of source material came from here. A lot of practitioners who basically give their inputs. I think it's a great place for you to go to get more input, to get understanding of what others are using it think. Because it's other people's practice that really helps you the most. So you can get my opinion, you can get other opinions, but you really want to bring those things together to help you to understand as you go on your scaling journey. So descriptions for some of the thought leaders. I'll let you take a look at some. You can see Craig Marmon Large-scale Scrum is Scrum applied to many teams working together in one product. So one way of answering the question is the same focus as Scrum, though it skirts concrete answer. This is basically, it is Scrum. Now, the one from Dean Leffingwell is interesting, and it's kind of telling at the way that people respond to SAFe. SAFe values business practitioner outcomes over ideology, theory, framework, practices, or method. You are doing something that will get a lot of flack from, or a lot of heat from multiple directions that probably means it's something worthwhile. And SAFe does get a lot of heat. I mean, a lot of people respond very strongly one way or the other when it comes to SAFe. Is something being done right? I think so, because, I mean, if you look at the case study, if you look at some of the practice, there's a lot of success coming out of it. But it takes a lot of heat because you say, oh, it's got so much in it, you know, it's so prescriptive, and there's a lot of other things that people aren't crazy about. But I think you should analyze it with your own, you know, thinking as you go to that. You shouldn't just take the buzz, so to speak. This is the Agile Scaling Knowledge Base, which is from the agilescaling.org. So that's just an example. I'm not going to go through it. Please feel free to go out there and check it out, though. I recommend you do that highly. Okay, other notable scaling approaches. So, of course, and I have the author here in the room, we are going to talk about Spotify. And Spotify has good shoeability. It gives us a good idea, right, of where you start. It's quite interesting to be able to understand what are the tribes, how is it organized, provides a clear organizational structure, provides a structure for cross-team Kaizen, continuous improvement, right, and flexible. It's not only prescriptive. So you can kind of adapt this. It was designed for the organization. So in larger enterprise contexts where you would take on SAFe, I think that you see a lot of times people actually start trending towards SAFe, including here in Thailand, as a company I can think of, and others, where there might be more you need to add on to your practice because this is evolving. I think that was kind of the comment, is that, you know, this is still evolving for the organization. And when it comes to multiple teams, right, you might need to add on to only a fit for company culture similar to Spotify. So for instance, I work with a company in China. Their culture was nothing like Spotify. And there is not a chance on this earth, I'm just being straightforward about it, that this would have ever worked for them. I mean, they were just so siloed, so set in the way that they did their work. So you really have to have a culture that will adapt and support this. And it's not designed as a scaling framework for other organizations. It's primarily designed for Spotify only. So if you choose to use these, you should realize that, you know, I'm using something that's designed for this company. It's not a commercial framework that is coming out with certifications, and that's not the purpose of it. Scrum of Scrums. This is probably the grandmother, the grandfather of all scaling methods. Pretty much every single scaling method is based on this. I mean, it almost doesn't matter which one you use. It's Scrum of Scrums. Bring the teams together a few times a week, look at what the different dependencies are, where are they, how are things working, look at SAFe, look at less, whatever it is, it's in there. Right? You're almost always going to find Scrum of Scrums. I use this in a very large engagement, which I was doing, the one I was doing at Disney, but we had to actually add more on top of it. We had to add on top of it a lot of Agile project management components and a lot of other pieces that, because Scrum of Scrums is very minimalist, right? So if you're simple, probably the simplest approach to scaling Scrum, and they work well for a few teams. If you have 3 to 5 teams, you're probably going to do fine with this, but it is not very shoeable. There's not much guidance. Besides meeting a couple times a week, what other guidance do you have? It doesn't provide structures needed to scale beyond a small group of teams. No treatment of programs, no treatment of portfolios, no treatment of Agile engineering, and no treatment of architecture. So it's a great foundation, but you shouldn't plan that your entire plan for scaling Agile in your organization is to do Scrum of Scrums. Because unless you're a really small organization, it's not going to work. You've got to consider these other things, and you've got to figure out how you're going to do them. Now, you might do them traditionally, you might do them another way, but don't look for Scrum of Scrums to tell you what to do. It's not going to tell you that. But I love Scrum of Scrums. Okay. Nexus, Scale Professional Scrum. So it consists of Nexus framework and approximately 40 practices, which cause Nexus and scaling initiative to operate predictably. So it comes to scrum.org, basically at the product backlog, the sprint Nexus sprint planning, and the Nexus sprint backlog. You have an integration team around this, a regular set of teams that are doing their Scrum, and then you have your potentially shippable product increments here. So basically, you're just putting this around the fundamentals of Scrum. Again, so it's in alignment with Scrum, which I think is a good thing. Now, you'll see here, Ken Schreiber and Scrum.org's involvement is a plus, and it follows simple Scrum principles, which I think is great too. But There's very little information publicly available. Now, I will make a note that at the time that I last did an update on this, the guide in August was a release, so there actually was a guide. Before that, the only way you actually got information was to take a test. And then if you took the test, you could go take the class, and then you would learn more. So it wasn't like there was a lot of open information. I mean, it wasn't safe where you go click out there and you find everything about it. It was kind of very limited in terms of how do I get to know about this. I withhold more comments on this because for me there just wasn't enough information, and I think they're going to come out with more practice. They'll give more background, and we'll see how this evolves. But right now, it's limited in terms of what we're going to know about it and its practice. So going forward at scale, the second wave of Agile. We're going to do another turn and talk. Let's see how we're doing on time here. Okay, I want you guys to go back, find a group, find another group, talk to people. I can't see it, sorry. 5 and 15. Oh, to the 45-minute point. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk for about 3 to 5 minutes here, and I'd like you to look at what are the biggest challenges if you've been adopting. If you haven't, talk to somebody who has. What are the biggest challenges that you've hit in trying to adopt a scaling approach? Is it leadership doesn't buy into it? Is it you don't know what to do? What is the challenge that you've run into? So let's take some more time, get to know the same people, some other people. We'll talk in a few minutes.
Challenges